Hi, this is Kelly Connect Slovenak from KS Information Services. This is the first video in a series I call the Pineapple Upside Down Security Layer Cake series. This series of videos addresses malware and email inboxes. I broke the information into a series of smaller videos in hopes to make the information more digestible. There are a lot of layers to understanding information security, and I'm hoping to show you these layers in bite-sized pieces. I'm starting with what I call the plate, the fundamentals of information security. Those fundamentals are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is the protection or the secrecy of data, preventing or minimizing unauthorized access to the data. Next is integrity. Integrity is the concept of protecting the reliability of the information you have on your network or the information you're using. Integrity could also include the integrity of the system or application used to process your data. Availability means allowing access to the information for only authorized users in a timely and consistent manner. Next, let's look at the risk equals threat times vulnerability equation. When looking at security related to humans and email, the risks that come to mind are the loss of data in a data breach or the loss of access to a computer. What causes that data breach or loss of access to the computer is the threat. For example, ransomware or malware in emails or email attachments are threats. Vulnerabilities are the way that those threats exploit a system. The vulnerability we're discussing is the human action. The vulnerability is someone clicking on the malicious link or attachment in the email. Let's go a little further in depth. To do that, let's look at the risk by understanding what the assets are that we're protecting. Our assets can be information, or our assets might be a process or a software. We may need 100% uptime, so protecting our uptime would be the asset. What are threats? Threats can be unique things that we may not think of as a threat. It might be a human error or natural disaster, but of course a threat could be a bad actor who's external or internal, trying to take information, corrupt information, or make it so information's not available. The vulnerability is a flaw, a loophole, limitation, or an oversight. In the inbox for humans, it's clicking on a link in the email that they shouldn't be clicking on. It's the threat coupled with the vulnerability that puts your asset at risk. Let's go a little deeper in understanding the elements of risk management and how they directly apply to security fundamentals. We have our assets. We know that our assets have value. It's important to understand the qualitative and quantitative values of those assets. We have threats trying to get to our assets. We have vulnerabilities. Where vulnerabilities overlap the threats is the place of exposure. And exposure is what's going to ultimately lead to the risk that we're facing. Let's explore this relationship a little further. We could have a huge threat, but with very little vulnerability, and the amount of exposure is small. Even with a small exposure, if the asset has a tremendous value or the risk has a high dollar consequence, there may still be a large risk. Conversely, we could have small threats but large amounts of vulnerabilities, and that might create a higher exposure level. Again, the level of risk will depend on other factors, like the value of the asset or what business continuity plans have been put in place to mitigate the risk. So you can see you have to take a little bit of a deeper dive in that combination of threat times vulnerability equation to understand your exposure and then to understand the risk. Once the exposures and risks are identified, we have choices. We can accept, mitigate, deter, avoid, or transfer the risk. If we accept the risk, it might be that the asset has low value or there's low cost associated with the loss or compromise of the asset, and it's not worth the expense of implementing safeguards to mitigate the risk. In other situations, the asset or cost of compromise may be higher, making it advisable to determine the most appropriate way to mitigate the vulnerability or threat. We can do this by applying mitigation techniques to the vulnerability, the threat, or even the asset itself. Sometimes when we address the asset directly, we can find a way to avoid the risk completely. Also, after implementing mitigation techniques, we may still have residual risk. With residual risk, one option may be to purchase a cyber insurance policy. We've reviewed a lot of information on risk and security fundamentals. Let's bring things back into the security realm and talk details about a threat. Malware in email is the threat highlighted in this series of videos, and the vulnerability is humans. According to the 2019 Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, 30% of data breaches are related to malware. If we take that 30% and we blow it out into its own pie, what we'll find is that 90% of malware is delivered through email. That is a significant number. In the next video, we will review some of the different mitigation techniques used to address the threats and vulnerabilities associated with malware in email.